All right, so we'll go ahead and call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Today we only have one item on our agenda, which is to review the draft of the Financial Recovery Plan. Mr. Stith is going to be taking us through this. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge, putting this document together just in 1 year takes countless hours of work, and Mr. Stith has been doing it year after year. And it's always very comprehensive, and just appreciate all the time that he puts into it, and appreciate him coming in and taking us through it tonight. But Mr. Stith, whenever you want to get going, just
sure,
you can run the show.
And I think I'd also like to say that this is a lot of department heads submitting their budgets, their budget request. A large part of this, the mayor and the administration was involved in. There are 4 parts to what is in front of you. There is the fiscal recovery plan in 2 parts, which is a narrative and then the actual financials. And then there are 2 exhibits, attachments, attachment A and attachment B. The simplest one of these, attachment B, is just a staffing plan of the city. So starting at the very back, just to know that this is the number of employees in each department per year throughout the city, and kind of title breakdowns for those individuals. So we're not going to go into great detail on that, but that is a piece of reference material. So then we can start at the beginning and then work our way through. The fiscal recovery plan is a 5-year plan that has 3 years of historic data included in it. So beginning in the year 2019 on this specific plan, moving with the actual expenditures and revenues for 19, 20, and 21, and then forecasted expenditures and revenues for 22 through 26. The beginning of the plan kind of talks about that. If you look through the materials that are here, this tends to be general information on where the financial reports come, who writes this, etc. And then we get into the narrative. The narrative section is written by the mayor based upon the information that we're using, and kind of hits the key points throughout the plan that then create these numbers. So, I don't know, Mayor, you want to read through your narrative section?
I can hit some of the highlights. I don't think you want
Sure.
to hit all of it. But it's interesting because the state auditor gets... It's interesting because the state auditor takes a look at this, and the Financial Recovery Commission is constantly looking at and checking over what we are doing. And then the state auditor comes up with questions. You know, some of this stuff, as you read through it, you talk about, hotel tax and income tax, and really putting predictions together on where we will be in the future as we went through, really changing times. And hard to predict some of the stuff, but even hotel taxes coming back, and there's a lot of discussion on different ones. Fees, licenses, and permits is coming back. Construction stopped, so those permit fees went back. So then we have Factory 52 coming in, and Factory 52 it's already started having a positive effect on the city. You look at all the construction workers that are in there, that's all good for us. We saw the same thing years ago when Rookwood or some of the other developments went into place. So, and those permits are, and the licensing that comes in with all of that stuff is important. We continue to work on the surplus, selling off surplus items. That's in there. There's another effect of the pandemic, Fund 89, and Jim and I had many discussions on how that would change the finances for the city. And Fund 89 is the abatements, the tax incentives that we've put in place. Well, those tax incentives are based on bringing more employees in, right? You're going to bring more employees to the city. We'll give you, well, if you don't hit some of those, there's clawbacks. So some of that stuff has came into it. It's really been dynamic. Those changes in the employment levels has really been interesting. Jim even added, as we were working through this, Jim added a few different narratives to it, talking some of the stuff, refunds and rebates that are going to come in with earnings tax. He's had discussions with James Bonza, with the treasurer, about those changes too. So all of those is very dynamic and changing. We're not sure what the exact effects will be. We're trying to budget them out and trying to get those things going. And then on the second page, there's some personnel services and talking about I've talked many times about we're trying to restructure the city, and we are trying to run it like a business. As much as you can run a municipality like a business, we are trying to run it in that manner. We're trying to put all the tools in place for the employees to provide services on a higher level, and I think they are doing that. We're starting to really achieve that. Even as we look at the water department, and I know that's not really part of the general fund, but even running the water department as a business, it's a utility, and trying to get those things done. So satisfying our customer by doing our job right and having the structure and the right people in place is a critically important part of it. I talked about at a council meeting how important the superintendent of public works has been and how much he's brought to the table for us. Clint has been able to generate a lot of activity in the city and save us a lot of money. We're spending some money, but we've got people in place. Mike Skelly. So putting those people in place. When you're in dire straits and somebody leaves, you don't fill that position because you're going to save $60,000 by not filling that position. And then what you find out over a short period of time is that person is not just worth the $60,000. They're worth 3 times that because of what they bring to the table for the community. So those things are all happening, and you'll see some of those staffing things in there. Other expenditures, we're utilizing HCDC, the Hamilton County Development Corp, to work on economic development. We've got different parks contractual. There's a lot in here to read, and as you go through those, if you have questions, offline, feel free to give me a call, and we can discuss it and go over those things too. So there is, I would say, a lot to digest when you go through these narratives, but also I think there are a lot of them that are very much common sense. As you read them, you go, that makes sense. I mean, begin the LED retrofit and reduction in street lighting programs. We've got so many streetlights in the city, in areas where they're redundant. We've got a street light, it seems like every 20 feet down Montgomery Road. Do you need that? Especially if LEDs have a stronger and cover a better area. So there's improvements in lighting. So those things are all pretty simple and straightforward, and I think you're not doing much head scratching. You're going, yep, that's the way we should be going. So that's all.
Two major sections of the narrative. Number one, and I'm not sure how plugged into the city you guys have been, but we've paid off our bonds in 2021. We have no more bond debt in the general fund. That is huge, because that's the thing that destroyed us a few years ago. That is now gone. And they're actually bearer bonds, so they have to give them to you. It's what they were stealing in Die Hard. Nobody has those anymore. The other thing you see here is an actual, according to the agreements with our employees, they're beginning to pay a higher percentage of their healthcare cost. That's another huge thing that took years to be able to get in here. So those are two huge accomplishments that do help our financial picture. So then we begin on page 12. This is where it gets interesting. You'll see this top section is revenues, and revenues are broken down into property tax, earnings tax. You'll see there's a subheading of Fund 89 tax incentives. Hotel tax is also broken out. Then intergovernmental, charges or services, fees, license, permits, fines and forfeitures, our investments, how much money we actually get back from investments, and other. And others tends to be kind of a miscellaneous category. You'll see there is under other in 2021 and in 2022 some really big numbers. They kind of stand out to you. 1.1 million and $2 million because those are the miscellaneous revenues that come in. We had a huge return of our workers' comp fees from the state as part of the coronavirus release, they gave back that money. Now, because it was coming back, not the year we paid it, but a year or two later, we could not just do that as a reduction to expense within the department. We had to actually book that as revenue because it was from a different year. The other thing in 2022, as we mentioned, there is a clawback from a business from Fund 89 because we paid them incentives to have certain staffing levels and earnings tax production for a specific amount of time. They're now breaking that agreement, and per the contract, they must pay back the incentive. Because again, it's crossing years, that's going to come back into, right now we're booking as miscellaneous income. However, there is a chance that before you see the final one of this a week from now, they may say, you know what, move that to earnings tax. So you might see that jump from one line to another, but the numbers will stay the same. We also got a $512,000 refund from the IRS, which was nice, because you don't get those very often. So that really bumped up what our miscellaneous, our other income on the bottom is. And then you see projected in the future, it drops to $43,000 a year. And to me, that's one of the big standouts, right? That's what our normal miscellaneous income is, unless we have these big kind of unexpected sudden things coming in, which are nice, but you know, we're not planning on definitely getting those in the future. Property tax, we're projecting is going to be level for what is projected for 2022. We've gotten those numbers of $3,211,000 from the county. Now, we are going to have a reevaluation of our properties, I believe, in 2023, where they come out and reassess. And so 2024 will be a different number. However, I communicated with the county, and they said they don't have any projection on that until they do the assessment. So we'll find that out next year or the early part of 2024. So it's difficult to say, is that going to go up a little bit, down a little bit? It's probably going to go up a little bit, but I don't want to say it's going up a lot. We've worked with the new treasurer on coming up with these numbers for municipal earnings tax. Obviously, it's gone up, and then it's going to dip a little bit, and then it's going to come back up and level. And you'll see when we get down to his key, we are anticipating a significant amount of earnings tax refunds, so that amount that we saw spike in 2021 is going to be probably offset by increased refunds in 2022. The rest of the areas of the general fund you can see, or the general fund revenues, are all pretty much the same, pretty flat. When we break out that Fund 89 earnings tax incentive, you do see a major drop there. That's not money that's in the general fund. That's money that's in a separate fund, Fund 89, where there are certain incentive agreements with some businesses in the city that if they meet a level of payroll amounts on a given year, we rebate half of the amount of the collected payroll tax back to the company. So that works really good when you're bringing in $1.3 million. You're really bringing in 2.6, and you're giving them 1.3 back. You see it drops to $215,000 this year because many of these large companies are allowing people to work from home, therefore they no longer pay their earnings tax in Norwood. So that is something that the Treasurer's Office is definitely on top of and working on how that's going to affect us over time. But these numbers reflect those current predictions. Do you guys have any questions on the revenue section?
Is COVID relief funds captured in here
No.
anywhere? Is that a different key?
That's a different fund.
Okay.
So I believe that's Fund 2095 off the top of my head. So the basis of fund accounting is that if a revenue source dictates that your revenue must be accounted for separate from the rest of the revenue from the city, then you establish a fund for it. So, for example, water bills, the law says must be kept separate, and you can't use your income from people's water bills to pay your auditor's office. You have to segregate that in its own fund. And there's a variety of different funds, but special funds are things like you said, COVID relief money. That comes in and it has to be accounted for and separate from the rest of the accounting for the city. Therefore, we establish a fund for it. Yeah. And we do anticipate the same amount this year in that fund as last year, which is $1,035,000, I believe.
Okay.
We had just gotten confirmation on that about a week ago.
Okay.
Then we look at the expenditures by department. And the order that this is in follows the order of the financial reports or the account keys that the city uses. So it always starts with, section 100, 0100, which is city council. This is how much your personnel services are. This is how much your contractual is. You will see a jump from 21 to 22. And that's because you guys now get paid more.
The 10% increase?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we voted last year, and I say we, I had no part of it, other than suggesting it. So as an elected official in the state of Ohio, if you are part-time, you actually get a full year's credit as an employee under OPERS. So that later, if you become a state employee, the years that you served your community as a part-time elected official count towards potential years for retirement. However, for that to work, you must make a specific amount of money every month. And because the old pay in 2003, I think, got cut, back when we were having financial troubles, they cut everybody by 10%, and the council people were getting paid a 10% lower amount. That puts you below the threshold for qualifying for those years of service. So we repealed that ordinance that had decreased your pay 10%, not giving you any kind of raise, but taking away your decrease. And that just puts you back to where you were 20 years ago. So we felt that that was fair and would allow you to kind of have that one benefit that you do get as a council person. And you'll see that does make a slight
Those of us who
increase.
served like 4 years prior to this, that doesn't count toward that because we were paid under the old thing.
Correct. So, and for example, all elected officials got an increase, but I didn't get one and the mayor didn't get one because you don't get it. They can't change your pay during a term.
Yeah.
Right. You're stuck at what you got from the beginning. Clerk of council, you'll see it kind of goes up and down, and it really depends on who is working there. Do you have a secretary the whole year, et cetera? And so the projection is a little higher this year because of the anticipation of somebody new and frankly getting paid a little bit more than what had been done in the past. The mayor's key, you'll see a big jump in the personnel cost there also, and that's because we've actually hired some people. We have an HR director, which is desperately needed by the city, and it's doing a great job right now, but that does cost money. And so you'll see it reflected there, as well as a secretary and an executive assistant to the mayor. Not all of those positions were full, although they had been funded. They weren't filled for the whole year of 2021, so you'll see a jump in the pay because we do have those people working for the city now. Clerk of Courts, that's 2 employees, and then the magistrate is paid contractually. Law Director, you'll see there is a jump in pay for 2022. That represents a full-time law secretary. For the past several years, the person who's been splitting their job between 30% legal and 70% IT work, they've now moved into a full-time IT position. So we have fully funded a full-time person in that department. If they choose to hire a part-time, that's up to them, but they're funded for a full-time person, which they are allowed under the way that the city is set up. You'll also see the expenditures under the contractual service. You'll see it wasn't that much in 21, and then it jumps up in 22, and then it lowers in 23, and it jumps up in 24, and then it lowers in 25 and 26. And that's because those are the years that we use outside legal fees to pay for people to negotiate union contracts. So whenever there's an activity of dealing with our collective bargaining units where we're hiring outside legal sources, that's that reflection of kind of that up and down through that key. The auditor's office, we had gone from a part-time person to a full-time person and then didn't have them for the full year, and now we've fully funded all the positions in our office, and you'll see that there. Contractually, you'll see our contractual does jump up a bit and jumps up again. That is because we're paying, there's a lot of things you'll see later in this that we are now paying out of the auditor's key, and we'll get to that towards the end. Just like the treasurer and the public lands and buildings, there's some fees that used to be paid for in other areas of the city that now have been shifted to these departments. We also have hired Paycor as our payroll processor. It doesn't take over payroll for us because it's still a very active job that the city has to manage that, although they're essentially handling a pretty significant amount of kind of the back-end work on it, plus the time card entering and things, no more paper timesheets. Treasurer's office, you'll see a huge jump in personnel services there, and that's because they haven't had anybody to work there. They've been very understaffed. You'll see that again under the earnings tax, and if we anticipate on fully staffing that office to the level that it is funded, you're going to see an increase in pay and cost to the city, but hopefully you'll see an increase in service, and you'll also see an increase in revenue that those departments bring in because you actually have people there doing the jobs. If we move to page 14 on the top, we just talked about the personnel that are in the earnings tax office. You'll see a big jump under contractual. It goes from $298,000 to $900,000, and then it drops to $500 after that. That's what we were talking about, this anticipation of a very large earnings tax refund that worked at home, but still had taxes taken out here. If they can prove they weren't working in Norwood, we have to pay them those taxes back. So in talking to the treasurer, we really wanted to make be ready for a big refund this year, and hopefully it's not that high, but we'll see. A lot of thought has gone into these numbers. And again, you'll see the tax 89 incentive line here exactly matches the one that's on the revenue side. So those two completely offset. Those are not part of the general fund, but they are a part of earnings tax, and therefore the Fiscal Emergency Commission did want to see those within our reports to get an idea of the entire revenue that we would see from our earnings tax. Civil Service Commission, these are all part-time individuals who run our merit program. They're the ones that give the civil service tests and deal with those kind of issues. Service Director's Office, this is where Mr. Powers is. You'll see there was a jump in pay there. We actually added a new person to the role at the end of last year, so they're fully funded throughout this year, which is a project manager. Actually having somebody that says, wow, here's all these capital projects you want to do. Who's going to organize this? Who's working with the contractors? Who's hiring the companies? Who's making sure the job's done right? Who's putting all the schedules together and timing all of this to make sure that they're not putting in an air conditioner in my office and then tearing it out to put in the window. So we need people that know how to do that. So you'll see that go on there. Whenever you see this travel unassigned vehicles, that's gas. That's what we buy. I probably need to increase that. I'm going to mark that down because just given from when I made this, this part of this probably in December till now, I think gas has changed a little bit. I did give it, I believe, a 4% increase this year, but I think we're way above that now. Building department, you're also seeing a personnel increase there to some extent. That is a full-time building manager, which we have not yet hired. Contractual services, there was a jump there. That was their budget request, top of my head, I don't remember. Do you remember we're contracting out?
Well, we're still contracting for plans examination and a couple other, and we're also contracting out some site inspection work that the city receives, we receive permit funds for, but then we've still got to pay that out.
Police administration, you've seen this kind of creep up, but a big thing that happened there was there's two clerks that when dispatch went away last year, Two of the dispatchers became police clerks, and they do a lot of the filing that dispatch used to do for the police. So those people just went there and handle a lot of the paperwork issues to free up the officers.
Jim, quick question.
Yes.
Sorry if I missed it.
Uh-huh.
The contractual services for the Civil Service Commission, what
Yes.
was the jump there?
That is because we're anticipating tests.
Okay.
So when we give tests, you have to advertise it in the paper, you have to have the test produced. Sometimes you pay a company for the test, but they're good for only so many years for each test. So you'll see this sort of like where it spikes and then it drops for a year or two, and then it spikes again because that's when those tests are given.
Okay.
And based on promotions too, should a high-ranking firefighter retire, and then people below him have to then take the test to, right.
Okay, thank you.
So we try to calculate those in. Police department, there was a jump in overtime at the end of last year. There's some increased expenditures under the personnel side for training, but you'll see that kind of drops down and levels off. And in looking at this, you'll see all of these personnel keys trend up over time, and that represents built-in raises, either raises that are part of the union contracts or step increases where every year you get a little bit more money, or you go to a new job and you get a little bit more money, and health insurance is increasing throughout this entire time. It's being offset by the increased amount that employees are paying for the health insurance, but the amount we're paying is this, and the amount they're paying is this. So definitely it's trending up higher on our end. But you'll see that creep that happens over time. You'll also see a creep that's built in for, we put in a 4% inflationary rate every year for basic contractual services and materials and supplies, just the stuff that we have to normally buy
And that's probably low this year.
this year, and then hopefully it's not next year, but
With
it's
the way inflation is
averaged
right now.
over so many years. And frankly, we've been doing very well with not having that, and we'll have to adjust that on an annual basis. Auxiliary police down below, these are auxiliary officers. You'll see it was low. We would like to hire all 4 positions. We've had 2 people in there for the past couple years. These guys write parking tickets, they check parking meters, they deal with a lot of traffic violations, patrolling the parks, doing the kind of routine police work that they can free up officers to do, more advanced police work. Capital projects under police, all of the capital projects, you'll see those numbers reflected in the next section of this document. So if you have any questions about capital projects, all of those numbers carry forward from another part of the document that breaks them all down in detail. Fire Department administration, you'll also see an increase in it, and that's because they also went to a full-time secretary. So you'll see some staffing increases where they used to split a secretary up until last year with the police. Now they each have their own. It's not a secretary, it's a administrative assistant, sorry. And if you ever look at like things and you, what are the fixed expenses? Most of the time when you see fixed expenses like under fire administration, that's your gas and electric bill, the majority of the time. There might be some fixed expenses that represent like a lease payment for a long-term lease, like for police radios, but most of the time the fixed expenses are going to be Duke bills. If you look under the fire department here, their fixed expenses under fire department suddenly drop off to 0. That's because that's a radio lease. You'll also see that under the police department for their fixed expenses, where their gas and electric bill tends to be paid under their administrative key, fire administration instead of fire department. And we have 2 keys for that. That way, all of the officers, all of the union members, the linemen are all in one key, and then the administration's in a separate one, separate department. We also break out EMS. There's no personnel services in EMS, but there are, that's where they buy the drugs and the equipment for the life squads. And you'll see there's a principal and interest payment in there, and that's the lease for a life squad, and you'll see that it does run out. You will see a jump in the capital projects there, which is actually just paying cash for a life squad instead of borrowing it, because I don't like to borrow money. And if you have the cash, you should just buy it. So, yes.
I don't have a question, more of a comment. I had let Mr. Thompson know I have to get going a little early because of a thing I couldn't get out of. So I do not want to leave, but I really appreciate you
Sure.
coming and walking through this, and I will be watching this after I get done with my other meeting.
And if you have any questions
will-
on this, feel free to give me a call or email me.
I didn't want to just like awkwardly pack up and walk out without saying a word.
Slide backwards out the door.
I'm out, police, fire, EMS, what is this? But yeah, I really appreciate it. It's been really informative just to see these numbers, and I look forward to watching the rest of it.
Great.
When I get done with this other stuff that I wish I didn't have to go to.
Well, enjoy yourself.
Thank you.
You will see a big jump in the materials and supplies and contractual for EMS, and that is as the fire chief has notified us that the expense for these medications and equipment has just gone through the roof. So these are actual projections of what their estimates of their expenses are. Superintendent of Public Works, this is only the superintendent and only the administrative assistant there. Public Works, as I say till I'm blue in the face, is not a department. There is no Public Works department. Public Works is a union and a classification of employees. And those employees are scattered through a number of departments throughout the city and through 2 funds in the city. So you'll see Superintendent of Public Works is the person who oversees that, and his pay is split between there and the water fund because he's also one of the managers of the water fund. The street section, these are where the employees for Public Works that work in streets are paid. And then you'll see there's capital projects, materials and supplies, fixed expenses. And you'll see under the capital projects, it may not look like there's a lot of money going into streets, but we've talked about fund accounting before, and the idea that we're segregating certain monies like gasoline excise tax and permissive tax. You'll see that later where those are broken out. The next is City Garage. They take care of our cars and our equipment and everything. There is going to be a purchase this year that you'll see under the capital projects, which we'll go into later. The community center, that's the old community center. You'll see a jump in personnel services. There's been an open position for a manager of the community center for a while. Now that we have the recreation center, it's really some thought going into when to hire an individual to work there. Community development, new position. Halfway through last year, we actually hired, which has been a very long time since our prior community development director, Rick Detmer, left, which is 11 years ago? 12?
It was really Susan Roschke. Dr. Roschke was the community, Rick was the economic development director.
Oh, he's
so-
economic director. Okay,
Yeah, but Susan was longer than that.
So that had been a vacant position, and you'll see that now it's been filled. We still have some contractual service money in there, which is for HCDC, Hamilton County Development Corporation, to help us with some of the economic development, and they've been really great lately. Public lands and buildings. This is where I said we did have the person that worked in the law department split for here. They've now moved to a different department, so you'll see a drop in the actual personnel expenses, and that basically is our custodian there. Also, under fixed expenses in this key, we see all of the non-departmental gas and electric bills. What are the things that really cost us money? The street lights outside come out of the street part of the general fund, but this pays for most of the city's buildings, gas and electric, unless they're a separate building like the police and the fire department over here, where they have their own separate utilities. Capital projects, big numbers there. You'll see those later. Those are, what do you do with the public lands and buildings for the city? What do we need to fix? What do we need to repair? The fixed expenses, like I said, are the Duke bill. Contractual services, there's a lot of things that fall into this, and we'll talk a little bit about those as we get to the end of this. Again, alluding back to why there's a jump in the treasurer and the law department and in that key. Parks and playgrounds, the next section, we have a lot of personnel expenses. Again, more public works people in here. We also have 4 part-time or 4 seasonal employees that are contracted for in there. And then contractual and materials and supplies, and again, some large capital projects. We do break out contractual and materials and supplies, and kind of the way to think of that is if I was hiring someone to paint my office, I would be contracting someone to do it, that's contractual. If I was buying paint and Public Works was painting my office, that would be materials and supplies. So the things we buy to do the job ourselves is materials and supplies. Contractuals when we hire someone else to do it. That's the big difference between those two major keys.
Mr. Stith, I noticed on the 2025, 2026 under capital projects here, we have a pretty big drop off.
Yes.
What's that for?
We'll see the capital projects in a minute, and you could see the breakdown of it. The next section, dispatchers, this is where the old dispatch section was. You'll see the drop off, and then the contracted amount to Hamilton County, along with just a standard increase based on inflation for that. Then underneath it, the creation of a new department, Norwood Communications, or NORCOM, where we've moved some individuals to, and work that they're doing. Also, this is where the IT person that was split between law and public lands and buildings has now gone. So you'll see a jump there, but we're just moving the expense from one key to another. It's not an increased expense necessarily. Under that, health administration, we used to have keys. If we look on the top of the next page, health administration, health medical, health environmental. We don't have those anymore. We only have health administration. We don't split it out this way anymore because the health department is no longer part of the city. It is a separate legal entity that we do their books for, but the Board of Health runs that. We supply them with the building to use. We supply them with staffing. That's where this health administration people are. There are people that work for the city that we donate as a staffing service to the Board of Health. And the reason we did that, instead of saying all of you no longer work for the city or work for the Board of Health, is they couldn't be part of our collective bargaining units if they weren't part of the city. So this was the solution we came up with. But you'll see this sort of shift. And if you really break down and look at the finances in a little more detail on the revenue sheets and the spreadsheet that makes all of this, you'll see there was a big drop in some of our charges for services. And a lot of that was all the things the health department did that came into our general fund revenue that we used to pay those people now goes to them to pay their health commissioner. So you'll see where there's a change at the top of this next page where, whoa, there's no more health medical service and health environmental because those individuals are now paid out of only the administrative key. Because it's no longer a department we run, we're just supplying them staffing, we move them all into one section. Recreation, you'll see a big jump in recreation's budget because we actually have a recreation department. We have a recreation building. We have 3 full-time staff running recreation. We have a bunch of part-time staff. We have year-round swimming in the pool. We have a workout center. It's not just the pool in the summer and basketball in the winter. There's a lot of programs. This is an investment back into the community, and this is what taxpayers' money should be going for. So these numbers that are here, we'll see the capital projects listed in a moment, but a lot of the numbers there are actually based upon what the projected budgets were from the director of the recreation. Below that, you'll see what's called non-departmental. And if you look at this, it goes 2 pages. You can kind of lay them open there. And there's a whole bunch of zeros. The very top line that goes across is the retirees benefit program. And you'll see it was $437,500 last year. This year, it's $413,000. That's because we paid it, so we know how much it is. We did pay that. And next year, it's $409,500 because unfortunately, one of them has already passed away. So their $3,500 has come off of that. All of these zeros underneath, if you look and you see DRETAC, workers' comp, state examiner's fee, insurance for the city, outside legal fees, settlement of claims, all of these different keys used to be broken out into miscellaneous expenses. And if you look at the prior reports, you'll see all of these things had There's significant, state examiner fees, county fees, county treasurer fee, county auditor fees. But what they did was they said, take all of those and put those into a department. So the county treasurer fee, the state auditor fees, the county fees for the auditor, all of those came to my department. Outside legal fees, settlement of claims, they all go to the law department, right? Here, we used to have a separate line item for earnings tax refunds. They're like, move that into the earnings tax. So all of these that used to have expenses down here are just moved into departments and broken down into those keys. So when you saw little jumps, really, it's not as apparent here, because if you went from 18 to 19, it would be more apparent where there was a jump, but all it did was just move from one area to another to kind of clean up our accounting. Then it shows what is our total general government revenue and our total general government expense, which you'll see below. And again, that does include the Fund 89. And then debt service underneath there, and you'll see there's 0 in 2022. That is the bond payment that has now gone away. And then it lists the total expenditures for the general fund below that, or for the funds in the fiscal plan. Under that, we have changes in fund balance. So when we look at our expenses and we take our revenues and we subtract our expenses from it, are we over or under? That's where that changes in fund balance is. And again, we come into the year with a nice balance. So we're starting 2022 with $8.2 million and $381,000 in outstanding encumbrances, meaning purchase orders that had not yet been paid. Think of your Duke bill for December you pay in January. That's kind of what to think of there. That left us with $7.9 million. So the fact that we are negative, that we're expending more money than our revenue has by $1.2 million, that still lets us end the year at $6.9 million with an expected encumbrance of $250,000 that will end this year at $6.7 million. Now, the important thing here, because this is a 5-year forecast, where are we given all the negotiated things we've got with the union contracts now, all of our projected increases in expenses and healthcare, all of these plans and capital projects that we're doing, that number on the bottom right corner should be about $1.5 to $1.6 million. Right now, in this one, it says 1.493. This is a draft, as it is said on the bottom of every page. That'll be a little closer to 1.6 on the one you'll see, probably 1.55. We'll fine tune some of the areas of the expenditures early on to give that what we want. And where that number is, where that comes from, that's our expenses for the following January. You should always carry forward about what, from 1.5 to 1.6 million. So this is just under that, but I want it to be a little like 1.55 to 1.6, just to make sure there's enough to pay our bills in January in case something happens. And that's kind of best practices. Any questions on what you're seeing here? This most important thing, page 20, bottom line, right-hand side. And what you have there. Every change you make changes that number, and you want that around that 1.5 to 1.6.
The object would be to, going forward, we eventually get to a stable place where we're sort of, because cities aren't in the revenue generating business.
No.
We should be trying to spend about what we bring in, and so that's the purpose of that, is we eventually sort of right side to the proper level, and then that's the goal to move forward with.
And also, as part of that, though, in doing these 5-year plans, and some of the things you'll see under these capital, there's a lot of stuff that went undone, and things that went unfixed and unpurchased for years, and we're now trying to catch up. But you can't do it all in 1 year. There aren't that many contractors, and like how long does it take to do a project? So we really space those out over a few years. But the other thing that's part of it is, we're going to need a new ambulance here, because we know we have these. We're going to need police cars here, here, and here. And like knowing that we're going to see a spike in our expenditures from a purchase that we can anticipate 3 years ago, maybe we can take that 1.5 and make it 2, so that then we can buy that ambulance for cash and not have to finance it over time and pay interest.
Right.
And if you can save up to buy things, that's better. The next page is page 21. this is where we can say, you know, it's not a definite thing that we can build into the plan, but here's something we would like to do. And so, where they talk about eliminating the life insurance plans the city has, that can save, you know, almost $11,000 a year. And then that'll show how it changes your balance, and that really, over time, that gets us to that 1.7 at the end, if we do that starting next year. So, kind of wishful planning, not as solid as a lot of the other things, but some ideas that we can come up with. This used to have a lot more data on it when we started this process, and as we actually implemented the things that were listed there, they actually went into the plan and came off of these lines. Page 22 and 23. We are reporting 3 different funds in this fiscal recovery plan. The street fund, which is 2002, and the state highway fund 2003. 20 is an indication of a special fund, and the fund number is 02 and 03. So it's the street fund and state highway fund, revenue through gasoline excise tax, permits, interest that we're making. You can see the revenue at the top and sort of what are our plans, capital projects for the street fund for 2022, $2.1 million. $1 million in 23, 900,000 in 24, 925, 926. Leaving a little extra room there for if there's a good project, we can actually shift some money over because we do have a positive carryover of 471,000 at the end of the plan. So if there was a year that we have to do 1.2 or 1.3, we can do that. You'll see materials and supplies, that's salt. That's all that comes out of there. You'll see the changes in the fund balances at the bottom. Then for the state highway fund, the same thing. You'll see some capital projects listed there. Do you have any questions on either one of those? Those are nice one-page, pretty simple things. Now, what you're seeing here and what you just looked at, this will change before you vote on it, but the changes won't be material. The majority of things that are in here are pretty solid. There's still some fine-tuning that we are doing on certain payroll projections where we do step increases of people, but when you're talking about changing pay 75 cents an hour on 20 people every year for 5 years, that makes a difference, but it's not a material difference when you're talking about that big of a number. And we're going to offset that by fine-tuning or trimming either some contractual materials and supplies or some of the capital projects that are listed here. But this is really a wish list. So everything you looked at here, this we are bound to. Once this passes, we really can't change it for a year or until we come out of fiscal emergency. This is, if you're saying this much is in contractual for this department, that's what you have. Getting a change to that, while it can happen later in the year, I want to say it is very difficult, and you have to really prove your point to make that happen. The capital improvements plan part of it is I don't want to say it's a wish list, but it is what we plan to do. And what we plan to do may not actually always be what we do. If you see something in there and it says it's $180,000, and oh no, now that thing costs $185,000, you can do it as long as it falls within the total capital projects budget for that department. Similarly, if you have something in there for $180,000 and it's only $150,000, you got $30,000 to spend on something else, as long as it's a capital project. And by definition, a capital project is any purchase or improvement to an item or a facility that is greater than $5,000. Buying a police car is a capital project because it's greater than $5,000. Putting an air conditioner into my place, if you put a bunch of air conditioners in, then it's that because you're improving the building. But buying a new computer, not. Buying a new server is. So when we look at it here, the building department is the one at the top. Again, you can see it's broken down into the 5 years for the plan. I might shrink the font because this is kind of spread out. But starting with the police department, buying 2 cruisers every year. We know that police cars are gonna break down or get wrecked, and we need to buy new ones, right? So there's a lot of expenditure in the beginning. There's things going on with the police department actually getting repairs done. The police academy needs a lot of work done to it. These are all built in. Then you'll see that bottom line, police projects to be named. That means that we don't really know in 2024 what they're gonna need fixed, but it's probably gonna be something. So we're gonna put that aside. The fire department on the next page. Oh, the fire department starts on this page and carries over to the next one. You can see the major things that they have to get done or purchases that they have to make.
No, you guys don't have any questions? I mean,
Quick question.
this is a good place to hit questions when things come up. Say, well, why are we, you can say, why are we doing that? Or why?
I have a great question. Oh, I have a question.
All right, we'll tell you if it's great or not.
I didn't
This
mean
question
great.
is
I
awesome.
meant I had a question. I'm sorry. What's the Police Academy water pump service? What's that all about?
Behind the police academy is a large cistern. So where the police academy is, originally, it was a pumping station. It was part of our water system. And then it got changed over to the police academy in the 50s. And there's still a huge water, a big tank sitting back there.
Underground?
And we'd like to remove that. No, it's about 3 feet underground.
Oh, okay.
It's really just a big cistern.
Okay.
And they used it, at one time, they used it for recertifying the pumps, the fire pumps. They'd go and they have to run at a certain level, but they haven't used it for that in years, and we're thinking of just removing
It
that.
has nothing to do with that where the water used to run there in the front?
No,
Okay.
the artesian well that was tapped into, no.
Okay, thank you.
Can you really get 2 police cruisers for $100,000?
Of outfitting the police cruisers is a challenge at times. We're looking at, yes, it ends up being that the chief uses there's some discretionary drug money that they can use for certain things. And the chief would like for the cruisers to have cameras and different things, but we've really sort of held back, and we've been able to get some police cruisers on the track. We're looking now we had actually a meeting today about some fleet management stuff. We're discussing how long should we drive a police cruiser and how long should we drive city vehicles before we turn them in. And the thought process being, we purchase vehicles off the state bid list. So we might purchase a vehicle that on the market right now is $75,000, but because we're on the state bid list, we get it for $55,000. We can drive that vehicle for 5 years and trade it in, basically sell it back off, and times like this, we could even make some money on that type of situation and have new vehicles coming in on a more regular basis. But that's all sort of, we're probably looking at that, down the road. But, those are expenses. The police cruisers, right now, it's hard to get a police cruiser. They're so far out. I mean, the chief talks about how long it takes to get a fire truck, and he's already talking about, we've got to make plans because it takes so long. We're gonna run into that with police cruisers. Their cars in general are getting a challenge, so. But yeah, for $100,000, we can get 2 police cruisers, yeah.
With the capital improvements, you said like once we vote on it, it's set in stone, and that's going 5 years out?
No.
No.
That's just for
1 year.
And with-
1 year, okay.
With the thing that's set in stone for capital improvements is the bottom line of each department. So it's not the line item, it's just for the police, they have $420,000 to spend this year. They don't have to spend 80 on this, 20 on this. They can break that up any way they want, add things or not do things, but it has to be 420 or under. So what is listed, the line items here don't matter. This is more of a plan of what they want to do and what they're requesting from a capital expenditure standpoint, but they are not obligated to do that. If they want to do something else, as long as the total amount at the bottom does not, as long as they don't exceed that, they can pretty much do what you
We
want.
basically pass a 1-year plan.
Yeah.
We pass a 1-year plan, and then that's set in stone.
Okay.
Until next year, we pass another plan.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think
and-
that's kind of gist of it.
So we're passing a 5-year plan, and then we're gonna do a tax budget, which is our first step of the process for the budget, and we're gonna do this in May for next year. And that's really where people can talk about how they wanna change the budget. That's the first step. There's a public hearing, the public can come, and that'll happen in May and June. And then this FRP, Fiscal Recovery Plan, passes, and this puts us into a 5-year plan. And this is our budget each year until we pass a new one of these. So right now, we have a budget. It's the FRP from last year. And all we're doing now is saying, well, we've operated the first quarter on last year's plan. Here's the way we want to change it for this next year. Once we're not in fiscal emergency anymore, you're going to pass the tax budget in June, and then we're going to close out the year. And when we get towards the end of the year, usually in November or December, you start having finance meetings and you make permanent appropriations and pass the budget for the following year by December 31st. And then throughout the year, you can make changes to that as things change. But because of fiscal emergency, we're held to this plan, where normally, hopefully in December, we'll be passing our own and not be in this anymore. But then that budgetary process is where Finance Committee meets every month or every couple weeks, and you guys decide, do you need to change the appropriations, and how does that affect things down the line? We've got the general fund, street department, where their expenditures are there, and all this is, as you look through, anytime you see a capital project expense and you're like, well, what is this for? This is where you look and where it tells you. Many things as we get, especially into public lands and buildings, on page 3 of this attachment, there's a lot of stuff. And this is where it comes in and says, upgrade council chambers, $115,000. Well, what if it's 110? Well, then you could spend $5,000 more on interior paint. Or what if it's 120? Then you spend $5,000 less on interior paint. As long as your bottom line number, which is a couple pages down here, $933,000, as long as your capital expenses for the public lands and buildings don't exceed that, you're fine. But what this is a plan where we sat down, well, the mayor sat down with the project manager and the safety service director and the head of public works and said, what do we need to fix? And how much do you think it'll cost? And they came up with a list, and that's where this comes from. And again, you'll see, like on page 5, it becomes less and less detailed as you go into the future, because I don't really know what needs to be done in 2024, or 5 or 6. So that's where you see this jump in, to be named projects, TBN, right?
Is that the storm and sewer repair anywhere in particular, or just a general?
That's a specific project. Storm sewer repair,
Or I'm not
Page
sure
5.
where you jumped to. Okay.
page 5, top half, 3/4 of the way down the public lands and buildings section.
125,000.
Yeah. It is one, but it's much like the project that we did right on the lateral. It's galvanized pipe that goes to the lateral. Clint already knows there's an area where it's collapsed that needs to be repaired. I think the last one we did was $80,000. So he will go out and get bids and say, how much do you think it's going to be? And that's what that's based on. So yeah, there's a specific location for that.
And again, parks and playgrounds, there's a lot of detail early on, because it's a list of all the things we want to do in '22 and '23, and then it tapers off at the end. But
So much, Jim was talking about the deferred maintenance. There was a lot of deferred maintenance. If there's one thing we'll be talking about over the next, for my 4 years here, it's, wow, we did a lot of painting, we did a lot of repairing, we did a lot of roofing, we didn't do a lot of building, we didn't do a lot in major improvements. We spent a lot of money getting the city back in shape, and the parks need it. And when we do this in the parks, it's revitalizing the parks, it's necessary. But I look at it and say, there's not going to be a lot of plaques running around the city of Norwood that say this project was completed at this time. It's like, we're just getting things back in shape and usable. And we've got good structures, good bones, it's just necessary.
it's just like the small park here next to City Hall. I don't know how familiar you were with that prior to the complete rehaul of it. But our office looks out on it, and, my deputy auditor was very concerned about the people he would see every day there and where they went when they were doing all the work. But they came back.
And we could put a plaque on that one, because Tom Perry worked, that's another part of bringing staff in. Tom Perry worked to get all the money donated, not donated, but grants to do that. And, those are infrastructure improvements that are extremely necessary, didn't cost the city much at all, some man hours.
Back to the, real quick while we're stopped, to the, which section was it? Oh, the public lands and buildings. So in 2022, we're spending, almost $1 million, and then by 2026, we're down to 100,000, which seems a dramatic drop. I can't imagine that by the time we hit 2026, we're only wanting to spend 100K on public improvements in this section, so I just wondered
I would
why
consider
the-
I would consider that more maintenance. And when we're putting this together and we're saying, okay, from our capital plan, what do we need to do to maintain our property? The buildings, the couple of buildings that we own. And at this point, there's been so much deferred maintenance, there's major upgrades that have to be made. But then once the upgrades are made, how much does it cost on an annual basis to maintain that building? Not necessarily improve it, because we would put those in other budgetary areas. This does not include anything such as grants that can be obtained, additional types of revenue streams that can be used. Those are all through funds and
Right.
fund accounting. This is more like, once you fix everything, what's it cost to keep it? And that's sort of where that number came from.
Okay.
And at that point, let's say it in 2026, it's a best guess, because we don't know what's going to break.
But there are organizations that will come out, and engineering firms that will come out and do a reserve study. And a reserve study, most HOA and condo associations will have a reserve study. And it says, you're going to have to replace these roofs on a and they'll give you a schedule, and they'll say, you really need to be saving up money to do it on this. And that might be something that we look at for the city, is having a organization come in, and they do a study on what we're going to, but we've got to get to a good footing before we'd even bring them in, right? If we brought them in 2 years ago, they'd come in and say, just tear everything down.
Fix everything.
But you're right, a year or two down the road, we need to look at that. And although, our project manager's a good guy and he's got a lot of good vision, and Clint does a great job and they've got a lot of vision, it's really hard to see where you're going to be in 2026. So,
I think that's a good idea, because the FRP keeps us honest in looking at 5 years.
Yes.
Kind of thing. When we get out of there.
We're
as
still
you
not
said,
at 5 years.
We still got to do 5 years, but these kinds of things,
Let's get it basic,
to be sustainable, you really even need to look beyond 5 years for a lot of these kind of
Yeah.
projects. So I would see a lot of value in that kind of program.
They do those reserve studies on those communities. Within every 5 years, they'll update it. So it's going out, they're looking at 20 years. They're looking at the lifespan of playground equipment
Right.
and saying, you're going to have to replace this in 5 years. And what are you going to do in your swim pool area? They'll tell you, you're going to have to rehab the swim pool at this time, start saving money, roofs, all of that stuff. So that's
I like that idea.
Yeah, and that is what we're starting to do when we talk about, when do we buy ambulance, when do we buy a fire truck? We know we need this many police cars every year. We know this big expense is coming. But to do that from an infrastructure standpoint, we've never done that. And that's something I think that we're lacking.
the city's got a lot of moving parts. That'd be
Oh, yeah.
it would be an expensive study, but it probably would be worth it. And once the first time it's done, then the renewal of it every few years is not as much of a challenge.
And then on page 8, you'll see recreation, a lot of upfront expenses there, and then dropping off in the future because we are expanding. We are we bought an old building, it needs a bunch of work, we're trying to fix things, and we're trying to expand our services. But again, once we get to the point that we reach where we need to be, then it's just a general maintenance every year from there. And then planning, like you said, how long's a pool pump last?
Right.
Should we plan on buying one of those 10 years from now?
Quick question, Jim. General fund on page 2, what's a skid steer?
That would be,
It's a Bobcat.
Is it a Bobcat?
It's like a
Okay,
Bobcat,
okay,
but, yeah.
okay.
then the last page, page 9, this is an idea of where the money from the capital projects from the street fund will be expended. Again, you'll see a lot of it's repaving It's other projects, because we don't have specific bids on all these things.
Where you at again, Jim?
Page 8, or page 9.
Thank you.
Now, this is just one of the funds that pays for things for the street. There's other ways that we pay for street projects. We can use monies from our permissive tax, Fund 2005, which is trucking fees and licenses that come in. And we tend to use that money for matching funds, or we would use some of this money for matching funds. So you get an OPWC, Ohio Public Works Commission grant, that comes in and says, hey, if you guys put $200,000 into this project, we're gonna match $800,000 in a grant. That's the way to spend it, because that's how you pave $1 million street. You can't just say, we're paving this street for $1 million, because you'll do half a street a year. But you use this money, and you use money from other funds in conjunction with programs that we can do, getting either 0% interest 30-year loans from OPWC for some major projects, or even better, grants, matching funds. These are the things that pay off. And we do use some of the community development block grant monies for that, as well as street fund money, permissive tax money, and where allowed, state highway money.
Which grant is the one that they kind of look at sections, like it was the one that, was it Sherman that got paved right by Sharpsburg? That was for a grant because of the income level was under 51%.
That was a community development block grant funding of it.
And those numbers are probably gonna change when the new census data comes out, possibly in some areas.
Could, yes. I mean, I'm not sure how much that'll affect it, but,
Okay.
but you're right. It is okay to use those in certain areas.
Yeah.
In other areas, you can't really utilize that, but
But that's an interesting point, because a lot of grants, wherever you get them from, have kind of stipulations on the kind of things you can use them for. Sometimes it's income level, sometimes it's what's on the street, so there's hoops you have to jump through for all different kinds of grants, and
that's one
happens to
thing
be one of them.
that we're lucky we've got JMA, which has been doing this for years. They've been the engineering firm for the city for years. They were here when the city didn't have much money and we did what we could, but they are experts in all of those grants. And Jennifer Vatter is one of the people that we're dealing with all the time. She's bringing things to the table. She's even making recommendations. We're putting in for grant funding, and she'll say, well, they'll give you a loan for this street or that street. And she'll say, but it ranked pretty high, and I don't know that you want to take a loan for that street, because if we do it next year, it'll probably be, you'll get a grant and you'll have to match it with some. So there's a lot of guidance coming from that expertise that's really helpful.
There are grants out there through OPWC where all we have done is paid engineering costs.
Yeah.
And it's covered. And then there are ones where we have to have some matching funds, 20%, they pay 80, and those are that's how you pave a bunch of streets.
And we're putting the structure, the things in place for that, for the Elm Avenue and Franklin project. I mean, surveying, and we're moving that along, and we're gonna get money for that. I feel very confident that as we move along, but you've gotta have all the, it's sort of like the mini planning grant for Montgomery Road. You've gotta have all the ducks in the row to get them to even look at your project closely. And I think we're doing it right for Elm Avenue, and I think even the Montgomery Road streetscape, all the stuff that's going on, there's some tentative plans there. When they repave Montgomery Road, we're pushing for it to be corp line to corp line, and we're pushing for all sorts of improvements along Montgomery Road that'll happen in the next couple of years. But, for me, I'd like to see it happen tomorrow. Like, why aren't they breaking ground out there? But you've got to put all the structure has to be in place to get it. But we've got the structure, and we've got people working on those things. That's something that we were missing before. We weren't getting the structure in place, and we didn't have the people. And they were doing their best at City Hall with what they had, but, we're primed to move forward now, so.
when you mentioned, this is like a tangent, but you had mentioned 30-year zero-interest loans. We had talked about, in our last finance meeting, when we do those for streets, we'd like to try to pay off those loans within the lifetime of a street. So a street taken good care of will last 15 to 20 years. We don't want to be paying a 30-year loan, 10 years after a street has already been paved or repaved a second time. So I don't know if there's some kind of I don't know I don't know if there's legislation we can do or if it's just policy, but I'd like to try to pay off the 30-year interest-free loans in 15 years so that we actually get a little bit of life of street without having to be paying for it. It's something to work into the plan as we
Yeah, they
look
would
forward.
not, those types of loans through Ohio Public Works Commission don't have like early payoff penalties.
Right, they don't, so
You know, so, but they also don't like it when you send extra money every month kind of thing. It's not like your mortgage. But you could be taking that extra money and putting it into, saving it up as those bottom line numbers and say, we know there's going to be a $30,000 loan payoff here or a $50,000 that we want to hit to do this. So let's put that in the plan as being something we're going to hit this far out.
Sits there and then it's like
Yeah.
the date hits in 15 years from now and you're like, oh, here's the rest of it.
Right.
A
Because it could be
big part
earning
of
interest.
is the preventive maintenance. And having a public works department that has the right equipment and is out doing preventive maintenance, crack sealing and closing street surfaces up and taking care of it properly, because that's what extends the life of your streets.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Clint was here when we were talking about how long it goes, and 20 years was a pretty good stretch, so.
You can, if you have from the different sort of, street maintenance for municipal, legislators, programs you can go to. If you're doing slurry seals and, you're, before you have to completely replace a street, it's a lot longer than that. But you have to have that repaving maintenance program in place that protects your base.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not just doing a scrape and a
Right.
cover is not super expensive. I've talked to a lot of people, they don't realize what it takes when you completely remove the road bed and put a new one down. And that's where the expense really comes in.
Yeah.
And then what's underneath that road? I mean.
Right, yeah, you don't know.
Just go over, dump all kinds of bad stuff, though. There's a lot of,
Run a big metal plow over your street and then throw a bunch of salt down and then have the freeze and thaw. That's the thing, people down south don't recognize, like, man,
Right.
it's tough to maintain streets when you've got, the atmospheric conditions that we have play a role in
So-
all of it.
So I will have a copy of this, not exactly this, because there's still some changes to be made, on Friday. That'll go out in your packets. There's a chance that the state will come back and make some last-minute requests as late as Tuesday. So
30
you
of
may
them?
get a,
30 of them?
yeah. 24 pages this year. So sometimes you'll get it and you'll get another one right before it, but there won't be a material change. If there is, it'll be something I'll explain, like they told us to take that refund money and move it here. And, but it won't make a difference to the balance, or you won't see major changes to the capital plans, or even departmental budgets. There's just a little bit of fine tuning that still needs to go in for some of the future payroll adjustments. We've even had turnover and, positions change so far this year. And even finding out that somebody's going to be leaving in July, that we have to budget their separation. So all of that, we're going to be adding in over the next couple days.
And you need us to pass this on Tuesday.
Yep. Has to be passed by the 26th, is it? Maybe by the,
The 30th
30th.
is when, the 30th.
yeah. So if you look at the last update that was made on the front, you can't go more than a year without having an update. And so you could pass it on, when's the next FRP meeting? Are they meeting in,
We're meeting on the 30th.
you're meeting on the 30th.
It would be like a,
They really like to see these
Is that right? Maybe
a
they,
few days before it. So,
No, I think they pushed it back to April 6th.
yeah. So you have to have it passed by by March 30th.
right.
April 6th.
We'd have to call special meetings if we wanted to have multiple readings.
So I will be there Tuesday night, a week from now, to answer questions. I've already sent you the original spreadsheet. When I get the one that I'm printing out from Friday, I'll send that to you. You can send it out to
Yeah.
people if you want to get into that mess.
You gotta open it and you look at it, you're like, nope.
Well, I just read the tabs. There's one that says general fund printable, which is what this
got it
is.
open
And there's
right
one that says
here.
capital projects. And they all link, so if you change something on capital projects, it changes it through all of them to this.
And that's the one when we get it, you said we can kind of
You can do whatever you want.
alter it and see everything. Okay.
Play with it, and really to hold on to it for this year too, and go, I know we're locked into this, but we're gonna be planning on what our budget's gonna be for, we start planning our budget in May. So you can really start to look at it and go, how does changing the way we do something here affect us at the end of the 5 years? From a revenue standpoint or from an expense standpoint, it's really built to do that,
Okay.
so. Any questions?
I just want to mirror Councilman Thompson. I appreciate you guys. There's a lot of hours involved in this. I really appreciate it. So both of you and the departments involved. So it's good work.
Yeah, this has been a group effort there's been a lot of hands in on this.
It's good work, man. Appreciate it.
Great, well, I'll see you next Tuesday.
All right, thanks, everybody.